Hello and welcome back to another magic related video. This is going to be a short re-recording. I had originally posted my Vanguard collection, but I was also half asleep during the entire video, so let's go ahead and actually do it right. What these are, Vanguard, is a supplemental gameplay tool. It came out around like 97 or so. It started as one of those Arena League promotional things, but it quickly got assimilated as a somewhat casual game archetype. These cards utilize what is now known as the command zone. These are also the size of a plain chase card, so you have to get special sleeves for them. What it essentially does is it gives you a kind of a few activated or static abilities during your games. There's a couple bits of history to it, really. Like, if you're familiar with the Arena League thing, that's something I was really big into. They were giving out promotional cards. For a while, they stopped and started on this, but then they just went back to giving out promotional cards again. If you're also didn't play around 97, another analogy we can use, if you remember when Arch Enemy came out, and it was super popular for about 6 months, and then it kind of faded into obscurity. This is kind of the same thing. But it's a pretty clever mechanic. There's some online games that use this as well. The original set, there's 8 cards per Vanguard release. There's 4 sets, so we got 32 cards total. Wait, is that right? Yeah, but so 4 times 8, whatever. The original 2 sets were also restocked as a Christmas box kind of thing around 97 or 8. That's actually what I got. I had a few duplicates since I was doing the Arena League pretty heavily. But the actual collection started after I got the box, and then I started trying to get the extra 2 sets afterward. But let's go ahead and describe them. What these do is essentially it's kind of like an emblem that you would get off of Planeswalker now, where it's something that's a card that you cannot interact with, like an opponent cannot interact with it, but it gives you some abilities. They are laid out essentially from characters from the book storyline, not the original one like the Thrawn, but shortly after, like the Urza Legacy series and whatnot, a few from the Brothers' War. So some of these characters are very popular, of course, from that era. Most of these characters are no longer alive, or if they are, they just don't get a lot of mention anymore. So they all have a name, and there's a unique picture describing these. Usually the pictures are far, far better than the ones on their actual card. Some of these, like Gerard here, he has his own card, or they're depicted in a lot of artwork on Magic cards. But the picture on the Vanguard cards, in my opinion, has always been just absolutely good. Like, just way better than the actual card representation. These are classified as characters, that is the subtype of the card. They have 3 bits here. So this is like a static ability. Some of these are just effects, some of these are activated. Then they also modify your starting life total. Some of them are plus or minus. And then they also modify your maximum and starting hand size. And they always have some nifty flavor text. But for casual 60 card decks, and we're in the league, you just played it. You just chose one that fits your deck best. Since no one really has these nowadays, what I tend to do is I turn the whole stack upside down. I shuffle it and let each player pick 3 at random, and then pick one of those 3 that best fits their deck. Because some of these are absurdly busted. Some are very underwhelming. It really depends on the deck. So obviously picking one that just makes your deck infinitely better and busted is not always fair. That's also kind of, I think, why they backed off. But in EDH, I do the same thing. We just double the positive or negative amount of life. So let's go ahead and get started. Gerard here, he is the legacy bit of Urza there, where he wanted some kind of reproduction of himself. Not quite a clone, but he's one of the Mithron. Like there's a big history where he came from. He's not actually... He's kind of like, I guess, genetically created. Anyways, his ability is essentially you just skip your draw phase, but draw an additional card. The problem is your starting hand size and your maximum hand size is 3. So that's actually this renders him almost completely terrible. That's something to keep in mind. While it's nice to draw an extra card, it's just, you start at 3. That's too hard to start with. And then we have Karn, one of the few that's actually still alive. Well, that we know of. Plus 6 to hand, or plus 1 to hand, plus 6 to life. Essentially makes all your artifacts artifact creatures. Just don't play artifact lands with him. We have Sisay. It just doubles your mana, but of course you got a double negative here, so your starting hand size is 5. Maruxus is one of my favorite characters from the storyline. I really wish this artwork was used over that terrible card artwork. It gives a small +1/+0 boost to your creatures. I like the ones that give double boost here, especially the hand size. So while it's really nice to have double mana, the smaller effect with the more consistent hand size is nicer. Miri just gives all your lands the ability to tap for whatever color you want. So if you're playing 3 or 5 colors in EDH, this is really good. Squeeze, one of my favorite, because you start with 10 cards, and you also have Telepathy, the enchantment out, so it's actually really good. Tangarth, I can't pronounce his kid's name. All your creatures have haste. I don't know if sacrificing one of your cards in hand is really worth that, but I mean, in the right deck, that's going to be a more powerful effect. Erte is really good because it gives all your creatures hexproof. Really busted in EDH, probably one of the stronger ones. Granted, you're starting at 6, but I mean, you immediately have your creatures immune to target removal. These are broken down into sets. They use the colors down here to dictate what your set is. So we're done with the first 8. Then we're going on to Volrath, or Varel, or whatever you want to call his original name is before he got all twisted. Again, very big stories there. I can't go into that without a pretty big side tangent. But you start with 8 cards, or 9 cards, and you have the essential Volrath Stronghold, where if a creature dies, you can put it right on top of your deck. Selenia, again, this artwork is much better than her card's depiction. Gives all your creatures vigilance, and a double bonus is really nice. 27 starting life is nice. Baron is very similar to his own card, where you can just sack anything you want to bounce something. That's actually something you can activate instant speed. It's right in the right deck again. Hannah, I actually don't like her too much. She's usually underwhelming. Granted, making your stuff cost 1 less is nice. In the long run, after the first few turns, some of these just become dead, and she's one of them. Like, it starts off early, but after turn 3 or so, you run out of juice. Orm's neat because he gives everything reach, and of course +12 starting life total is fantastic. Greven is one of my favorites. It gives a pseudo death touch effect. Since I love mono red, I tend to run things like Sharding Phoenix, and being able to sacrifice and board wipe every turn in EDH is of course a good, somewhat busted ability. There is Stark. If you know the story, you know he's kind of a douchebag. But essentially, you draw, and it's not quite the Anvil Bogarden effect. It's more like the effect from Tefari's +1 ability on the Planeswalker, where you just draw an extra and put one on the bottom. So it's a really good dig effect. Krovax is one that I used to really like, but his effect it's like Hannah's, or is that Hannah? Yeah. The effect is not that good. Since I tend to use these in EDH, granted, every single time one of your creatures connects, you gain 1 life. So unless you're doing a token swarm, that's really not going to be a big boost. But I mean, starting with 2 extra cards in hand is usually, if I'm doing the 3 random, he's usually a good pick. So we're on to the 3rd set. Raphellos here is, of course, just as busted as his original card. Granted, you start and your maximum is at 5. But any single time one of your creatures dies, you draw a card. And in the right deck, that's pretty brutal. Takara is... They didn't really touch on her in the story too much. She's just... meh. She used to be really good when damage was on the stack, because you could, of course, sack things after they deal with combat damage, get more damage off. And, of course, starting at 10 is always good, too. Cedar Kunda is Gerard's... not stepfather, but it's +3 to give something a temporary giant growth. The +12 starting life total is usually the more reason to use him. I've actually never felt the desire to use him. Sliver Queen is probably one of the stronger ones because you can instant speed drop tokens into play for chump blocks. Just instant speed access to creature tokens. It's good usually in just about any deck. Oracle, somewhat boring. She just lets you remove creatures from combat. Eldamir, or however you pronounce his kid's name, and I don't really care. Like, these guys were all around Wrath, that story era. Didn't really care too much for that bit of the book series, so I don't really care too much for these characters. But he's actually rather boring. Like, he just lets you redirect damage from your creatures, and you also get +15 life total. So he's really good if you just want to survive for late game. But since he doesn't really impact an offensive effect, he's usually just not picked. Multaney's pretty clever. He's like half of what his actual card does, giving a pretty nice boost to creatures, but you do start at 4 and you're capped at 4, so no matter what, he may be just a +5 no boost at best. That could be a good effect if you have a pretty quick selection of creatures. But I mean, it's super situational there. I honestly don't really use him too often. Lynn I love. This is kind of where we're getting close to Erte's little standoffish storyline here. Giving everything shadow is really good in the right deck, but you cannot, of course, block. I actually like her because I tend to do the more aggressive decks. Zancha, now we're on to the last set here. Zancha is one of my favorite characters. Gix is one of my absolute favorite characters to date, because I love Gix so much I have to like Zancha. I actually like her story. She's like a newt. Phyrexian that actually has some self-awareness. Because of that, she was basically not quite banned, or they attempted to kill her. She paired up with Urza and they had some fun. If you're familiar with New Phyrexia, or if you want to know why New Phyrexia happened, it's because Karn leaked a little bit of glistening oil from his heart, which is her heart. There's a lot of story her, and I actually had a whole deck built around the card Sleeper Agent, which is her. Just love the story, the flavor on her character, and the cards she represents is always fun. Ill-gotten gains, cards like that. Sarah is actually, it should have been a much more interesting card to use, but it's honestly more boring. It's more of like the castle effect, giving a defense boost. It's nice, a plus boost all around is nice, not having to actually invest mana or work with it. But I mean, it's usually just not really that powerful an effect. There's Gix, my absolute favorite. Granted, you're starting at 5 cards, but being able to recur creatures at instant speed and starting at +18 extra life. Again, in EDH, that would be doubled. You would be starting at +36 extra life, almost 80 life in EDH. His character is absolutely one of my favorites. I designed a custom, like a Gix Planeswalker card a few years ago, which always makes me laugh because the Sarkhan Dragon Speaker has the same ultimate as my Gix Planeswalker card had, whereas a type of the grafted skullcap. A lot of the cards that include Gix's flavor text are very similar to that effect, like the grafted skullcap effect. But he's just the powerful Prey Warder. He's actually supposed to be stronger than all of the other Prey Warders, even the colorfully aligned new Phyrexian Planeswalkers, or Prey Warders. I mean, he's a Prey Warder who was sentenced to death in essentially the hell of New Phyrexia, and he survived. If to kind of put a PowerPoint, a representation of his power, Urza is considered the granddaddy of all Planeswalkers, the most powerful Planeswalker. These two, Gix and Urza, fought each other. Gix was about to kill him when someone else intervened. That is the only reason Gix did not kill Urza. That's kind of how powerful he is. So I always like the idea that he's still alive. The idea when he died was that he was blown up or vaporized close to a planar portal, and the only remnants is the claws of Gix, his hand. So there's always some canon that he may still be out there, just maybe he was pushed through a portal. I like the idea of him as a Planeswalker, although I know in the storyline a Phyrexian cannot be converted to, or it cannot become a Planeswalker. As soon as a Phyrexian is converted or a newt is created, they have no spark. But the flavor there on him is fantastic. Then we have Urza. This is probably one of the most underwhelming Vanguard cards. Yes, you have 3 mana for instant access to damage, direct damage that is. But I mean, unless you have infinite mana, that doesn't do a lot. You can spend essentially 9 mana to burn something for 3. That's really not what you want to spend your mana doing. So he ends up being one of the absolute worst. Ashnod is one of my favorite characters too. This artwork, of course, does her really well justice. Not from her that, but also just showing the experiment of what she's doing here. If you just ignore her chest and look around here, like you see a corpse with his arm flayed open, just the eye of... There's just so much going on with this artwork. It's fantastic. And her ability is also very strong. It's the enchantment No Mercy. Whenever a creature hits you, they is destroyed. So granted, you start at -8 life, but this is honestly one of the more powerful ones. I like this one a lot. And Tuanos is sadly not nearly as strong as his Candelabra. But I mean, he gives almost everything you have flash, which is good. And you also start at +3. In a more controlling deck, that's actually one of the better ones. Mishra is, of course, one of the more powerful ones. He's much better than his brother. Being that this artwork is representing him as a probably with the Phyrexian Dragon engine in the background. Unknown if this is when he's pre or not yet converted. Essentially, it just gives you a gratuitous violence effect where all your damage is doubled. So he is one of the absolute most busted ones. And the most expensive one to date, for some unknown reason, is Titania. Very similar to the other ones, where they tend to have a very aggressive start, but just end. Like, the first few turns are great, but in the end they just slow down. She gives you the Explorer effect, where you can play an extra land. For some unknown reason, most of the Vanguard cards are like $2 or $3. Handful of them are $30 or so, like Gix or whatnot, and Sliver Queen. Titania is ridiculously priced. Luckily, I've had this one for over a decade. I don't know why her price is high. I don't understand why any of these actually have a classified value to them, because no one really plays Vanguard like how it's intended to be played. Really, the only way I see it possible to play this is if someone has the whole stack of them, because anyone who does this, like, you're expecting your friends to go out and buy a Vanguard card for their deck. That's not really what a lot of people do. It's kind of like Plane Chase, where no one really plays, well, at least in my area, no one really plays Plane Chase the way it's intended to be played. Where you have a selection of cards for your deck and everyone shuffles their planes together. That's how Wizards intended it to be, but no one really does that. There's usually just one person has all the planes and they shuffle that deck together. Because, of course, expecting people to go and buy extra cards per their deck for a casual experience, unless the entire group wants to go spend money, it's not going to happen. But for some reason, her price is a little ridiculous. Doesn't make sense. But, of course, she's one of the more powerful ones. You start at 9 cards, and you can play extra lands. Most of them that do kind of blow out early and they become dead static effects late game. She's one of them, although you will at least have a very aggressive start. But she is one of the more powerful ones just because of that. Personal preference, I love Gix from the flavor, but some of the other just more general useful ones like Mishra, the ones that give you Death Touch, things like that are typically my favorite pools, or ones that just give you a ridiculous starting hand size like Squee. But yeah, that's Vanguard. This is mostly a casual thing. It doesn't get to see play too often because explaining it to people takes a little bit of effort. And of course, these are a little old, so you got to be careful with who you hand these to. Luckily, they do fit the same sleeves that Ultra Pro makes for Plane Chase and your commanders. But again, it's an older card. A lot of people don't care or want to know, or there's just so many different casual archetypes that throwing this out when you have other options like Plane Chase, Arch Enemy, and all sorts of extra stuff, it sometimes just gets shuffled under the bus. But yeah, that's actually kind of how it just went. Like, for a while there, the popularity lasted a lot longer than things like Arch Enemy did, because it was kind of reinforced by the Arena League rules. But of course, that shortly faded into obscurity. But yeah, if you had any experience or any fun plays, like we do play in my groups, I do play this periodically. The most recent game that really stood out is I had the guy who gave all my creatures pseudo Death Touch, and I did have the Sharding Phoenix online, so I became target number 1 because every single turn I was able to pay 3 of my upkeep, get the Phoenix back, cast the Phoenix, and then sack it anytime I want to, burn all non-flyers, and then they died. Yeah, that's clever gameplays. But yeah, if you have any casual funness with things like this, always share.